Hi, everybody. I'm Ernie Green. I'm here with my friend Larry Molinaro, and we are going to talk with someone who did a performance with us a few years ago when he played the Bach Goldberg and his own set of variations along with Bach's, and it was incredible. So please welcome Dan Tepfer. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, Ernie and Larry. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I've had this fascination with Bach since I was a kid. I was lucky enough to grow up in Paris and went to the conservatory there. And, as you know, studying Bach is the meat and potatoes of studying music in France, if you're studying like classical piano. So I was playing inventions and preludes and fugues from a young age, and it really, even though I always thought of myself, even when I was a little kid, as a jazz musician, I always thought of myself as a jazz musician. Even though I did, the music of Bach just always spoke to me pretty directly, and so the Goldberg Variations I got totally obsessed with starting in my teens, but I started playing them in my 20s. And what I realized was that what Bach is doing in the Goldberg Variations is actually pretty similar to what jazz musicians do when they improvise on a standard, because he states this theme at the beginning, the aria, which then gets repeated at the end, the aria, the closing aria, and in between he has these 30 variations. And the thing that unites these variations is that they all use the same harmony as the aria. And so this is really similar to what a jazz musician does when she plays on like All the Things You Are or some other jazz standard. She'll like play the melody with the accompanying harmony, and then she'll use the harmony as it keeps cycling underneath to invent new ideas on top of that structure. And then usually the performance will close with a repetition of the theme of the jazz standard with the melody and the harmony. And so structurally, this is virtually identical to what Bach is doing. And it's important to note that not all theme and variations function that way. That there's plenty of theme and variations that don't use the underlying harmony as the connective tissue, but instead use, for example, the melody of the theme as the material that's being varied in the variations. So the Goldberg Variations, as a jazz musician, seem particularly special in that way. And so what I did is, over the years, I developed this idea that turned into Goldberg Variations, which I performed for you guys, where I play the 30 variations by Bach, and after each one of those variations, I improvise a variation of my own, where I really try to speak in my own voice as a composer and as an improviser. But I also use the same constraints as Bach, more or less, and then I'm using the same harmonic structure, and I try to react to the specific ideas that he's putting forth in each one of the variations.
Right.
Yeah, and I remember in particular what really appealed to me or intrigued me at the time. And thank you for pointing out about the variations being over the underlying the bass line and the harmony, because a lot of people get confused when they don't hear the aria coming back in variations per se until at the very end. But every third variation or so is a canon. And so I was intrigued at how you approached improvisation that actually picked up on this idea of canon. And I think this is something that you're now exploring, not just through your own improvisation, but through your programming skills as well. So can you talk to us a little bit about what you're doing with Bach Upside Down?
Yeah. For our listeners who don't know, a canon in music is simply means a piece that's at least two voices, and where a first voice states a melody, and then the second voice repeats that same melody a little bit later. But there's a bunch of subtleties to this, because first of all, there's that question of how much later does the second voice repeat the melody, and then there's also the question of does the second voice repeat the melody exactly, or can it be moved around a little bit? And so in the canons and the Goldberg Variations, the first one, variation 3, the first canon is a canon at the unison, meaning the second voice repeats the first exactly. But then the second canon, variation 6, is a canon at the second. So the second voice repeats the first voice, but a step away. So that means, if the first voice goes da ya da 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 da, the second voice goes la da 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 da. It's the same melody, but just 1 degree up the scale. And this continues throughout the Goldberg Variations all the way to the 9th canon, which is at the 9th. And this is kind of like the, how should I put it, the kind of austere intellectual center of the Goldbergs, really, because the canons are juxtaposed with like these very virtuosic variations that are a lot simpler from like a musical perspective, but a lot more complicated from a like dexterity and drama perspective, you could say. And then these other variations, which are like genre variations that are on like maybe a mood or a dance form. And so these canons are very kind of thorny and I would say drier than the others. And so part of that approach, of that idea of making music from a more mathematical perspective, I would say, is what led me to this Bach Upside Down project. So this Bach Upside Down project is really fun. It takes root in my study of what's called negative harmony, which is a whole theoretical idea about how to deal with harmony, but upside down. So where instead of things kind of falling down with the kind of natural gravity of music, for instance, if there's a suspension that goes la, it's kind of natural for it to want to fall down. Negative harmony, everything goes the opposite direction. It's kind of like as if you're on the other side of the world. It's kind of like Australian harmony. Everything goes up. And in fact, you can just take a jazz standard, for example, and turn it upside down, and then you get a negative harmony version of the jazz standard. So like all the things you are, for instance, the originals, you are the promised kiss of springtime that makes the lonely winter seem long. And the inversion is, you are the promised kiss of springtime that makes the lonely winter seem long. Okay, so that's just the melody being upside down, but there's actually this whole procedure to turn the harmony upside down as well, and that's really pretty fascinating. So over the years, I kind of got interested in what would Bach sound like upside down, and conversely, I developed this project called Natural Machines, where I've written computer programs for my piano, for my disc clavier piano, for it to respond in real time to what I'm improvising. So I got to a point with my programming where I could really easily write a program where I could play something and then it would immediately play it back, but upside down. And again, by upside down, I mean inverted. It's a chromatic inversion. we can get into that if you like.
Oh man.
But the point is, Bach is such a master of counterpoint that the interval relationships between every note are, incredibly carefully executed. And as a result, when you turn it upside down, those intervals stay the same. They're the same, but upside down. Like, if you have a major third, it's still a major third upside down. It's just the relationship is flipped, but the distance is the same. So when you have a master like Bach writing pieces with this incredibly careful counterpoint, you turn it upside down, the intervals stay the same, and it sounds still kind of unbelievably good still, but so different. And so that's what got me really turned on with this Bach Upside Down project.
It's fantastic. So we have a link to your blog where you have each of the variations. I think you're up to through 15 right
That's
now?
right. Yeah, I took a break after the first half, and I'm going to dive in again soon.
But what we wanted to focus on this particular week are numbers 12 and 15, because those actually are special because they already are inversions, right? So can you talk a little bit about that? And it'd be interesting here, what have you learned through this process, and in particular through the inversion of those two?
Yeah, so first of all, great idea to choose those two to show to your audience. Those are definitely maybe the two most special ones in upside down form. There's a few things to say. So first of all, variations 12 and 15 of the Goldberg Variations are canons. They're both canons. Variation 12 is a canon at the 4th, and variation 15 is a canon at the 5th. But they are inverted canons. So what that means is that the first voice will state a melody. Let's say it's going like ba 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 ba, right? And the second voice, instead of repeating that, what you might expect if it's a canon of the fourth, you might expect it to go instead of da 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 da. Let's say it's a fourth up. It'll go da ba da da da, right?
Right.
But that's not what happens. This is an inverted canon, so the melody actually gets flipped upside down. So instead of ba 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 ba, it's gonna go la da 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 da. Okay, so it's the same melody but upside down. And in fact, Bach says that these are canons of the fourth and fifth, right? But in many ways, it's kind of not. It doesn't really make any sense to call them canons of the fourth and fifth. The only thing that makes the first canon a canon of the fourth is that a G in the axis of symmetry that he chose gets transformed to the D below. So that's an interval of a fourth, okay? But an A gets transformed to a C. That's an interval of a sixth. And a B gets transformed to a B. Yeah. Is that true? Yeah, right, because it's diatonic. Yes, because it's diatonic inversion, right? So diatonic inversion is very different. But in any case, so there's only one note that actually gets transformed by a fourth. Everything else gets transformed by a different interval. So it's kind of not true to call it a canon at the fourth. And then the only reason he calls variation 15 a canon at the fifth, it's also an inverted canon, is that the axis of symmetry, instead of transforming that middle G to the D below, transforms it to the D above. So that's a fifth up. But actually the transformation is the same, just an octave up. So the canons at the fourth and the canons at the fifth in the Goldbergs are actually the exact same canon.
Yeah.
And Bach is kind of cheating a little bit by calling them canons at the fourth and fifth. And I love that. So anyway, the point is, they're inverted canons, right? So if the first voice says ba da 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 da, and then second voice answers by la da 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 da, then that means that within the canon itself, we are hearing both the normal version and the upside down version already. Because when I say upside down, I mean inverted, right? So we're already hearing that in the original variation. And in my Bach upside down process, I turn the whole thing upside down. I turn it upside down chromatically, which is different from diatonically, which is what Bach is doing, but still, within subtle differences, he's turned stuff upside down within his variation, and then I'm turning the whole thing upside down. So actually, we end up with something that's quite close to the original. It's kind of like doing, -1 times -1 equals +1. It like cancels itself out. So it's quite close to the original, but the harmony is inverted, and it's this completely different harmonic world that we enter.
It's almost it's almost like two transformations, right? Because the first transformation would be the inversion, but then your program is transforming the transformation back. So it's close in some ways. It's almost like, if we took something, translated it to one language and then a different language and then back again.
Yeah.
How would that be? What would be the subtle differences relative to translations even? So,
yeah.
It's fascinating to think about, from sort of a more generic concept. What amazes me about this is that we're talking about a piece of music that's almost 300 years old.
Yeah.
That we are still, we're still talking about, we're still finding new ways to experience.
I agree.
That speaks so highly for what Bach left us.
Yeah, it really does. And I think what's fascinating about this inversion process, the thing that I call Bach upside down, is that I'm really not touching Bach's data. I'm not making any kind of artistic decisions about how to change it. It's a completely
literally
linear transformation that leaves his data intact. If you apply it again to my Bach upside down, you get exactly the original, right? So,
Right.
so it's like, it's really like we're taking a photograph of like the Eiffel Tower or something and turning it
Right.
upside down. But strangely in music, whereas with Eiffel Tower, we would immediately recognize that it's just the upside down Eiffel Tower. In music, it just sounds totally new and
Right.
fresh.
So let me ask you sort of a process question. When you started to do this, because I can see the wheels spinning with some of the musicians who are going to be watching this, did you how did you transcribe it so you could do it this way, or did you work it from memory and try to rework it that way? I mean, if you just flip the music, if you do it upside down, you have to, it just gets very complicated. So what was the actual process to get you into the door where you were actually playing it?
Well, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I haven't played it a lot. I've played it a little bit, but virtually my entire approach at this point has been to let my computer turn things
The
upside down.
computer's doing it. Okay.
So,
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 so you're
so,
not actually, you're letting, that's the disc clavier.
I mean, I have played some of them because part of this project is not only to be able to hear the music upside down,
Right.
but also to generate scores. So I've been generating
Okay. So yeah,
scores.
so and that's actually
And the
where
scores are actually on your blog. So people who are, so even though you're not playing for us now, if you go to the blog, we get a video of you playing through straight, A, B, right? I think without repeats.
without repeats.
And then the disc clavier does the transformation while you kind of react to it, but not musically,
Right.
which is lovely. And then at the same time you have this video, then you've also generated the score. So people can read, they can read your thoughts on it, they can watch you play it, they can hear the disc clavier, and they can see the score, which is all lovely.
Yeah, and there's actually a few classical pianists, including Alessio Bach, who's one of the pioneer American classical pianists. I'm not sure he'd call himself American. I mean, he's been living in the U.S. for a long time. He's Italian, actually. But anyway, Alessio has made a beautiful version of Variation 13. And Renata Gutmann, who's a great pianist as well, she did a beautiful version of Variation 6. Wait, no, not 6, 7. 7, yeah. And Célimène Daudet, who's this amazing French pianist, made a video of herself playing the aria. So that's kind of my idea here is to encourage others to approach the inverted versions, these inverted scores, as new pieces of music in their own right. And actually, Alessio told me that the process of doing that was really interesting because in order to make sense of the upside down version, he had to keep going back to the original, and that taught him new things about the original that he hadn't noticed before.
Interesting.
So I'll actually have to take these and use it. So to add another layer of technology, I'll play them on the organ, but through the Hauptwerk sample sets, I can play them on the Silbermann organ at the Petrikirche. So you could actually hear it on an organ that Bach would have actually known.
Wow.
So, but then that means I'll have to practice though. But you've been getting a lot of good response to this, right? There was a nice article about this in the New York Times.
Yeah, I was super flattered that Anthony Tomasini, who's one of my favorite music critics, was turned on by this project and wrote a beautiful piece about it in the Times. And yeah, I've been getting a lot of responses. It's interesting. I think it's a project that for the people who know and love Bach, and especially for Goldberg fanatics, it's like, oh my God, this is amazing, like mind blowing. Because when you hear these things upside down, it's like, how it's so fresh and new and beautiful, but it's also just the original, and it's just like it's kind of amazing. But if you don't care about the original music the way that I do, and I know you do, and other Bach fanatics do, it's almost like, what's the point,
Right.
Well, it's still fresh and new and still interesting music. So that's what I think is astonishing about just getting to hear it in this way. And I think, Ernie, you were just pointing out that, here's music that, is approaching being 300 years old. And yet there's always something more to explore.
Listen, you and I got into a conversation 4 years ago about that wonderful hanging dissonance in Variation 25
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
that actually lasted for more beers than I would care to, describe here. But it's the other thing that Dan that struck me when we're talking about this is I loved, this is not Bach, but I felt like it was sort of with Bach on your shoulder, so to speak. You did a canon on All the Things You Are
Mm-hmm.
on one of your recording, and it was the octave. Was it at the octave? I think it was the octave.
It's a canon at the octave.
And it was very, what I loved about it was if you sort of if you stop trying to figure it out as it was going along and you allowed yourself to be in it. And I watched it several times because I played it for a couple of my classes at Washington College, and they loved it. I mean, they were blown away. But it is very, the line between All the Things You Are and Bach blurs.
Yeah.
That canonic treatment, and all of a sudden you find yourself going, this is a really awesome canon, and what a familiar tune.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, All the Things You Are in particular, I like that expression you used of having Bach on your shoulder. It's especially true of All the Things You Are because it has harmony that keeps moving through the cycle of fifths.
Yes, yeah.
It's like F minor, B flat minor, E flat 7, A flat major 7,
Yeah.
B flat, D flat major 7, G7, C major. So it has that movement that stereotypically we associate with Bach, even though he only actually uses it here and there. He uses all kinds of other movements all the time, but
when he does, it's so memorable.
Yeah, absolutely. He does it better than anyone because he somehow manages to do it in a way that doesn't feel tiresome. Whereas, if you listen to like Handel, for example, he can definitely lean on that a little too long sometimes.
Or Vivaldi, right?
Yeah, or Vivaldi is a much worse offender. Actually, you're right. Yeah, but yeah. So actually, you're talking about this canon on All the Things You Are. It's not something I composed. It's something I improvised, and using my computer to generate that canonic voice, and that's part of this project, Natural Machines. And I can say, with full confidence, that I would not have come up with the Natural Machines project at all with the same amount of kind of musical integrity, I would say, if I hadn't studied the Goldbergs so closely, because the Goldbergs are this fantastic example of making profound and lasting and emotional and touching and strong music with an incredibly strong theoretical backbone, and these very strong rule-based constraints that really support all the music, and that is what crystallized this idea for me that the music that I love lives at the intersection of the algorithmic and the spiritual. And so then Natural Machines literally became about that, right? It's natural and it's machine. It's an intersection of nature and machine, the natural and the mechanical, which is exactly what's playing out in pretty much all of Bach's music, that's supported by the rules of counterpoint and other rules such as the rules of canon or the rules of fugue, and also leaving himself sufficient degrees of freedom that he can be deeply expressive and personal. So that's really what's happening in Natural Machines, and that's what you're hearing in something like that first episode of Natural Machines, which is called all the Things You Are, Canon at the Octave. And it's just this idea of what happens if we impose strict rules on ourselves as improvisers. How does that affect the music that comes out?
So listeners here can, go to your blog and hear the Bach upside down. They can, we'll put in the link to the NPR Tiny Desk around Natural Machines, but we'd love to have you either in person or at least streaming, depending on how things shake out with Natural Machines. You've been referring to it, you've talked a lot about it, but can you just, for people watching this interview, just describe a little bit about the process of Natural Machines so they get a flavor of what you've actually done in that project?
Yeah, so really Natural Machines, as I released it, because it's an album that's both released as an audio album and as a series of 11 videos on YouTube, which, by the way, people can get to it by going to dantepfer.com/naturalmachines, or you can just search for Dan Tepfer Natural Machines on YouTube. But in any case, as I released it, it's this collection of different algorithms, and by that I mean different sets of rules that I then sit down with and just try to have fun with in real time, improvise, you know. And the comparison that I come up with is, let's say you're an astronaut and you can quickly, you know, fly to Mars, or you can fly to the moon, or you can fly to, you know, Europa, one of the moons of Jupiter. All these places have different atmospheres, different amounts of gravitation. And let's say that what you want to do is find a way to dance on each one of those planets. Just because the rules surrounding you are different, because the pressures on your body are different in each one of these places, you're going to have to find a different way to dance in each one of those worlds. And so that's exactly what's happening in Natural Machines. I haven't written pieces. I've written the way that pieces work. And so I sit down with each one of these rules. You know, as Ernie was pointing out, one of them is a canon at the octave, but there are all kinds of different rules. The last one, actually, the last Natural Machines episode is a fractal tree.
Right.
It's a mathematical object, fractal, that's generating music from the position of the nodes in the tree. You know, variation 2 is an inversion. Actually, that's not it's not episode 2, it's episode 6, something like that. I can't remember. But anyway, the point is there are all these different rules, and I sit down and try to make music with them. And I should point out that there's another really important aspect of the project, which is that in addition to these musical algorithms that I've written visual algorithms that take all the data of the music as it's being improvised, and as the computer's responding to these improvisations, and as I'm responding to the computer, taking all this data and generating graphic images and moving images that represent the music, represent every aspect of the music, the notes, the dynamics, also the hierarchies of the music, because, for example, what I'm playing is going to be represented often in a different color from what the computer's playing, and if the computer's responding in multiple layers, those will all be in different colors, and they might be linked together. Anyway, the point is that I've written these graphical visualizations with the intent of revealing as much as possible the underlying structure of each algorithm.
Yeah.
They're pretty incredible. They're absolutely stunning. I mean,
thanks so much, Ernie.
I literally, I actually made the class, a couple of them, watch them several times just because I wanted to see them.
I love it, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
well, we'll look forward to having you down to do that.
Absolutely.
And thanks for your time now. It's always a pleasure to talk with you and to hear what you're doing.
Yeah, me too. Well, I should mention that in my conversations with you both, I've come away having learned something at every time. So
it's very kind.
I thank you both very much.
I feel the same way about you. It was I kind of left our last hang together after your concert down here with my mind blown. Yeah. And to be honest with you, when I read your blog about negative harmony, I was like, so.
Well, I look forward to hearing how it hits you.
I gotta do a lot more process. I gotta read it again. I'm gonna read it again, and then I'm gonna process it, because it's really pretty. It's something, man.
Yeah, I mean, you know, to be clear, this is not my theory. This is a theory that is pretty old, but I learned it from a great New York saxophonist and composer named Steve Coleman. Idea of negative harmony.
But I think the way you present it is brilliant. You make it understandable.
Well, that's what I was trying to do, is present it in as simple a way as possible, because I found that it is. I actually learned it directly from Steve. Like I went to a workshop that he was holding, and you know, I heard it from him, so I understood it. But I found that for a lot of other people, it's harder to understand it. So I wanted to write a very simple primer.
Well, good. It's good. So, well, listen, thank you so much, man. I cannot wait to see you in person. once this craziness is done. And
Likewise.
thank you. So we will make it happen. And thank you so much
Yep.
for taking this time to do this. This was
Agreed. Thank you again.